Good morning, everybody. If you may want to take a seat, I welcome you all at this early hour of the day, especially after our boat ride yesterday. And I especially appreciate that so many of you have made it to our discussion, The Power of Narratives, How to Tell the Whole Story. The fact that this chair is empty doesn't have to do anything with any differences or any conflicts that I'm having with the participants of this morning's panel, but we are having a fishbowl discussion, and in the course of this discussion, we will always invite somebody from the audience to sit here, and we thought it's good to leave this chair in between the panelists open and vacant for you to participate. When we talk about narratives, they are very often developed by politics and media. And we are going to discuss in the next hour, what do narratives do? What do they do with us? What do they do with our media reporting? What do they do with the public perception of a particular conflict, a particular region? Narratives are, in my understanding, developed by media. They are developed by politics. We will talk about stereotypes in the media, in newsrooms, and in politics. And we will debate the question whether a change and a possible change of narratives actually scares us. Many of you might know such people that they have encountered who say, I've been to Africa. And then you ask, well, where have you been? I've been to Tunisia. I've been to South Africa. But the fact that this is a continent of over 50 countries, and that a Sudanese has as much in common with a Norwegian, with a Zimbabwean as a Norwegian has with somebody from Sicily, is very seldom and very rarely being taken into account. When we talk about narratives about Africa, very often we talk about stereotypes. We talk about hunger, we talk about famine, we talk about promiscuity, we talk about HIV, AIDS, and war. When we talk about China and the perception of China, we talk about a communist party. We are talking about suppressing Tibet. We are talking about Chinese. These are the people. Why don't you quickly take a seat and then we continue? You are not disturbing. You are most welcome. But once you're seated, we continue. When we talk about China, we talk about the Communist Party, or we have the perception of these are the people who are suppressing Tibet. These are the people who are eating everything that runs apart from humans. We are talking about people who are racist. We are talking about the fact that they are too many and that they have sinister motives when they come on shopping sprees and buy companies in Baden-Württemberg in southern Germany or in the United States or elsewhere. And we talk about China, and the narrative says it's a brutal dictatorship, and at the same time, it's a technological and economic star. We are going to debate all this with two outstanding experts here this morning, who have talked themselves about narratives and have tried and are trying to change them. And whether one can change narratives and how one can change them, we are going to discuss later on. I think that the inequality or the disparity in perspectives doesn't mean we should all have the same opinion and outlook, but we should consider the other one. I would like to welcome Catherine Gicheru, whom I still very much know from my time as a newspaper correspondent in the 1990s in Nairobi, based in Nairobi in Kenya. Catherine Gicheru is one of the big storytellers in East Africa, and she's a believer in the fact that journalism today can only survive through telling stories. People call her a lioness in the newsroom, who is fighting for her stories and who's fighting for her reporters. She worked for the once famous Daily Nation in Nairobi in Kenya. She's a co-founder of the Kenyan paper, The Star. And I welcome Ying Chan. She, just like Catherine, has collected many Academic and Journalism Award. She taught at Columbia University, and she's based in Hong Kong, where she's teaching at Hong Kong University. Both a big welcome, Ying and Catherine, to you. Ying, what narratives do you find elsewhere? Because you travel a lot. You travel a lot in Asia, you travel a lot in America, you happen to be an American citizen, and what narratives do you find in journalism about China?
Well, hello. All you said is true. There are a lot of stereotypes. And now with China rising, becoming the second largest economic power in the world, there's a kind of new fascination and new fear about China. Well, there are many stereotypes, and there are now new stereotypes. For instance, wow, there's LGBT activities inside China. Wow, research in China or innovation in China is going to overtake the United States. And so that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect, which is encouraging, is that we are having more diverse sources of information. So when we say, well, that's the West mainstream narrative, but actually that mainstream narrative is becoming challenged and fragmented. So there are many, many more sources of information.
And is your impression that when the mainstream narrative is being challenged, that the people who perpetuate this narrative, that they take up the challenge or they ignore it?
I think they need to take up the challenge, and they did. Because I think there's a new emphasis and recognition that China is one of the most important stories in the world today. We need to understand it. We need to figure out what really is going on. And China is playing a big role, you know. And it's always the invisible elephant in the room.
You're based in Hong Kong. Is there a Hong Kong narrative about mainland China?
Oh, yes.
Which is pretty similar to the Western narrative?
Well, it's very, very polarized. Politics is very polarized in Hong Kong. The media is very polarized in Hong Kong. And China herself is very aggressive in promoting its own narrative. So you have the traditional narrative, the new one from different sources, and China is very aggressively pushing its own narrative.
Catherine, I'm sure you have come across a lot of narratives about Africa. The African smiles a lot, for example. How does one deal with that as a professional newswoman?
I think. One of the things you need to do is to understand from where this is coming from, and then from there you say, "That's all they know." They should know better, but that's all they know right now. For me, is to look at it from the perspective that if there's any information that is going to come out of the continent or from my own country or from my own newspaper for that matter, it better at least be to the best of my ability, the reality, as much as I can tell it. Unfortunately, what has happened, it's especially when you look at the narratives coming out about Africa from the Western media especially, it's easy for Western media to take the easy road than the hard road. So you find situations where you have a kind of an echo chamber where you will find the Western journalist will talk to an international NGO which has sponsored him to go to a country of conflict or an area of conflict, and they will use the same kind of fixers, they'll use the same kind of sources, so that that story that they end up telling is more or less the same. For me, because I live and work in Kenya, or for that matter, for most of the African media who live and work and understand the countries they work from, they have a better place, they are better placed to actually add nuance and context. But unfortunately, Western media tends not want to talk to local sources to get the nuances right.
Is there an explanation for you? Why is this so? Why is the narrative that we have easy?
Well, I think it's because of what it's been. I mean, the motivation or the reasoning or whatever happens is coming from the interest. Because, like we say, I believe that the words we use and the pictures we paint tell a story, or at least shows our own understanding of what we are talking about. So I get a sense that the reason why this happens is because it's easier for somebody to kind of see Africa as two things, either Africa rising or the hopeless continent. But we don't want to see, it's easier for people to put into two boxes, two pigeonholes, than to try and understand the complexities of Africa. I mean, it's like, it's not one country. And I know a lot of you say, yeah, we've had that. But seriously, when you talk about Ebola, the most recent one is all the reporting that was being done about Ebola, as if it was happening in the whole continent. So you're talking about Ebola in one part of Africa, one country in Africa, or two countries, and then the whole of the continent is lumped into as one. So I think the reason why that happens is because what you perceive your audiences want to know. And I think your audiences are not stupid, but you seem, or media seems to want to tell them the least that they can do. And then they forget that the story they are writing is not about the other, it's actually about another human being. Except maybe you're in a different part of the world, but it's a story of people. So we don't put people in it.
You said, Catherine, that Western media likes to do this and that. Western media likes to look at Africa in such a manner. Of course, as a former newspaper correspondent based in Africa, I have to say, yes, there is this tendency, but it's not everywhere. And I think there are also many mainstream media institutions, the one or the other people who are actually trying to change the narrative. But what is the African journalist's effort and attempt to change this narrative? Because the way you described your reaction is like, well, that's the way they are, and we can't really change much about it.
Exactly, and that is why we are talking about ourselves being the ones to tell our stories. And we may not have the big media houses that are going to go all over the world, but in terms of working together with the media houses that are of interest or are interested in actually getting to nuance the stories they are writing about Africa, where we have our own people actually reporting. And that is now where the difference has come in. Because as it is, most Western media right now, and I'm not saying this collectively, every one of you is a devil, no. I don't want to condemn wholeheartedly the same way we paint Africa as one, but no.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm just saying what has happened is that because of what has, and I think I have to say this in terms of China, China came into Africa in a big way as far as media was concerned, and because of the kind of interaction, if you want to call it, that has happened, now you have the Bibs and many others coming back and looking and trying to create or to recreate that, what CGTN has been doing. And you're now having, instead of the season of Africa, because I always think sometimes in Western media, oh, there's, like you have, what do you call it? Is it Halloween for the Americans? Okay, let's use something everybody knows. Valentine's. Mm. In media, there used to be before CGTN, and this is just in the notice, in the 2000s coming forward, where you'd have a season of African news. So something bad has happened, then we write about it. Or you want to say, oh, they are also growing, so you have an African rising narrative, so you will have a season of that or something. But because of CGTN and its actually the Chinese government's intention to create this humongous media thing for their own interest, in the sense that they want to make us understand because they're investing in Africa, what has happened is that now BBCs, the Al Jazeera's, and everybody is coming up and setting up these humongous newsrooms which are talking and getting content from Africa, about Africa. And because of that, I think our responsibility as journalists is to tell the story to ourselves first. Because seriously, I'm not going to change your mind overnight, but I want my colleague in Tanzania or West Africa to understand. So that is what we're trying to do within our limited access. And if I can influence what the CGTN is going to put out, because they have humongous networks, hey, who says no? Because we know our limitations, and we use what we can to tell the best story that we can about ourselves.
Ying, how would you describe the Chinese reaction when Chinese people encounter this Western narrative, these cliches about China? I mean, at the moment we have in the West a growing fear of Chinese domination, not only economic, but also in the media field and elsewhere. Is the Chinese aware of that, and how does he deal with it?
I think it depends on which group of Chinese people we're talking about. They're Chinese and Chinese and Chinese. So you have the Chinese inside China, and then because the media inside China is very much under control by the state, right? You have the Great Firewall that you cannot access the internet freely. So you will have reaction inside China and say, look at those Western media. They are biased. They're against us. There's some legitimate anger, but there's also kind of spontaneous nationalism that the government promote. And then you also have, for instance, you have Chinese immigrants or Chinese Americans in the United States, right? When you have reports and stories say, oh, all the Chinese academics, students, they are intelligence collectors. They are sent by the Chinese government. And that's stereotyping, and people becomes angry. And the local civil society groups, Asian American groups, immigrant groups will organize and protest. Of course, their voice is very small. And then you have the rest of the Chinese in Hong Kong, in diaspora, with different reactions. So I think the answer is really that for the Chinese, right, wherever you are, you need to have your good journalism. You want to tell your own story, right? And I don't see us or Chinese or versus the West. They do a lot of good work too, right? Especially in recent years when Chinese investment is going everywhere, and while reporting for Chinese media is limited, either because of lack of resources or because of being controlled by the government. So you have a lot of non-Chinese media, whether international media, independent media. They do some good work in doing the reporting.
When you're saying that the Chinese want to tell their own story, that would be an attempt to change the narrative. But would the Western media necessarily be prepared to let the Chinese tell their own story?
I think by the end of the day, it's whether you can tell good stories. Where's your scoop? Where's the story? If you can tell the stories better, because we are locals, we understand the context. And we just have to be up to the game. So my approach is that instead of complaining, instead of getting angry, I would try to do a better job. Train the new generation of journalists, and which is what I've been doing.
With a stronger focus on storytelling, I believe.
You need to learn all these storytelling skills. You need to use the latest tools in telling stories, like digging into data, using visuals, using graphics, and tell the story. And you compete and to get yourself recognized. And then I think it's also behoves for those who have money to invest and to support independent media, indigenous independent media.
Catherine Guerrero, is storytelling the answer when it comes to the question as to how to tell one's own story and make it interesting and attractive for a Western audience also?
I'll come back to the same thing I said. Stories that we write as journalists are about people. And one of the things we need to start from, especially if you want to change the narrative, is to realize you need to put yourself in the shoes of the other person. So it's death, disease, disaster, and God knows whatever other D you want to throw at us, but it is happening to people. Why is it happening to people? So it is actually being able to tell a holistic story about a complex place, and we're not the only complex place. All nations are complex. And the other thing is also to try and understand that this whole thing of wanting to save somebody is not the way to go about it, and neither is this welcoming you and not being very critical. That's not it. It's very patronizing either way. But for me, I think...
With that, you mean the Chinese
model,
positive journalism model that is very popular with many African dictators.
Yes, it is very popular because it's not very critical.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we have a very critical Western media, and it kind of rubs everybody up the wrong way because they're critical without understanding. Now, sometimes they're critical with understanding, but it just doesn't gel. So we have these two, extremes. And we're not asking for anybody to give us anything. We're not asking anybody to cut corners. I think we can do that. And I think the way that Africa can change the narrative about herself is not only by us telling their stories ourselves, but actually being able to harness those powers, those, opportunities that exist. It's no longer us receiving, it's us giving. Economic empowerment, where we make determination as to what, when, who, where, is the beginning. Because even as much as China is trying to open up all the stuff that they're doing, especially when it comes to media, the conversation is more or less one way. We are hearing what they want, they think we should hear about them, but we're not having a conversation. So the difference is one side just wants to criticize and never see, it's either black or white, Africa rising, Africa dying, whatever. On the other side is, now I was going into lingua, I was going to say small, which means they're going very gently touching, they're not very critical because they think if we are, then we become, just like the West. And either side is wrong. And I would prefer that we have an honest engagement, and the way for Africa to have this honest engagement, either with the West or with China or whatever, is actually to take responsibility for our own storytelling and to highlight that which we know is our thing, however crazy it is, because it's ours. It doesn't need to fit into China, it doesn't need to fit in yours. We have to create our own narrative.
2 points. I think one is that, yes, we need to be better in telling our stories, but that's not enough. We also need to learn how to market our stories better. In the not so long ago, early days, journalists, you just do a story and that's done. We're responsible for content. No longer. In this attention economy, you compete in the marketplace of attention. So you need to learn how to promote your stories. If you got a scoop, you need to sell it. That's one. Now, two is that there are also possibilities for the little guys to work together. We call that cross-border collaboration, which has become more common. So African journalists, Chinese journalists, independent journalists can work together to explore some of these issues. Right?
So do you see enough Chinese journalists who would subscribe, for example, to Catherine's point of view when it comes to the Chinese way of doing journalism and journalism in Africa?
It's already happening. I don't mean this big state media, CGTN, those are the big Chinese state media. But you have journalists in Hong Kong, you have independent journalists, and you need to collaborate. Like, for instance, people's African friends would ask me, this company is coming to my community. Who are they? Where are they? Where do they come from? What is it state? Is it, how can I nail them down? They're hurting the environment, blah, blah. It's very hard for just African journalists to investigate and find out what's going on. And same thing, it's very hard for Chinese journalists to figure out because they're not on the ground. They don't understand Africa. But they read Chinese. They can search Chinese databases. They can do the investigation over there. So if you have journalists working together, right, and to dig up these stories, there are possibility that we can tell authentic, good stories. Another topic would be wildlife smuggling, the pangolin, the elephant tusk. Those are real stories that has been done. And I think those examples are very encouraging, and we need to do more of that.
When we talk about narratives, and we have talked about Western narratives so far, Catherine, there are many narratives about China in Africa and in African media. It's a dangerous place. They don't like people who don't look Chinese, stuff like that. Have you witnessed a change in narratives about China with the growing exchange and the growing interaction that one has with Chinese engineers, construction workers, journalists, you name it?
Okay, I have to say one thing though. Working with Chinese journalists on any story which is critical of either of my government or any government where they've got big deals, sometimes it's a bit of a hassle. And then the other thing is, so you want to change the attitude of the people of China. The people of China are not in Hong Kong, they're in China. And the only access they can see is through CGTN, maybe, if they're lucky, I don't know. I mean, she can tell us. But in terms of changing the narrative that is coming out of Africa about China, the stereotypes are still there, and sometimes, unfortunately, they are affirmed by reality. It is not a stereotype, it's the reality. But
the whole racism thing and...
I mean, yeah. I have this thing where, I don't know, we're not supposed to be racist because our Asian history thingy is not supposed to be. I know we had this humongous argument in my office and with my colleagues on WhatsApp groups. We have this WhatsApp group of journalists, and you're like, angry guys. We get really angry, and then we go out and write
angry pieces,
angry articles, because you're like, But on this particular, and this one was just after the Spring Festival where they did blackface, and the whole conversation. And within this group, we had actually Chinese journalists, and we were trying to get them to explain why this is not wrong, why they do not see why it is not wrong. And then the construct was that what they know of me, of Africa, is we are all strugglers, we're all colonized and all the rest of it. It just brings to mind something that Trevor Roper said, that before the white man, there was no history in Africa. And that's the same concept, that Africa the only thing it seems that our Chinese colleagues, journalist colleagues, know about Africa is because of what happened, because we were colonized and we've struggled and they helped us struggle, blah, blah, blah. But before that, there isn't. Yet on the other side, they also want to say we are part of you. So some of these stereotypes are for real. Some of them are obviously exaggerated. Again, if I want to be built a road, I will not go to Germany. I'll ask the Chinese to do it because they won't ask too many questions. And they'll give me the money. Okay, I'm mortgaging my life, my children, unto the 7th generation, but it's going to happen. And for somebody who wants to be re-elected, like our president wants to be re-elected, I mean, he's taking all the money he can because he has 4 major pillars of his whatever he's going to build. Infrastructure. It's changed people's minds. It's changed people's attitudes. Some of the stereotypes have changed because I actually have a road, which for the longest time, 50 years down the road, we've been getting aid from America, from wherever, but there's no road to show for it. 2 days after we've signed a deal, there's a road. So in a way, it gives well, I don't mean 2 days, and you know what I mean. It doesn't take too long, but it happens. And for that, people are looking towards and saying, yeah, there's certain things we want from China. There's certain things we want to do as Chinese. In fact, we want to be as hardworking as Chinese. But there are also other things which people don't like, which is, okay, you have no problem dealing with please, excuse my French, with a dictator. Let me use the polite one. The dictators, or the people who do not care anything. They have no qualms about it. But at least it's more honest than before, where you still dealt with them and kept them in power. But now I have a choice as an African. I will say, on these things they're bad, on this other thing they're bad. They bring their own people to work in Kenya, or they bring their own, and they do not mix. But then on the other side, we welcome them, but they are not welcoming. It is not reciprocal. It's not an equal relationship. So stereotypes will continue until we stop, or we start understanding each other, and we get a better grasp of who you are, what kind of a person you are. And then I also understand you better, so that when we have a conversation, we're having a conversation as equals, not as
It's very interesting, Catherine, to see how narratives also develop. I mean, in your exchange with the Chinese journalists, I'm sure that the debates you are having with them will ignite something in them, because the Chinese narrative about Africa very often is a narrative that says we are in the same boat because we were never colonizers on the African continent. Instead, we were colonized ourselves as Chinese. This is a fishbowl discussion, so I would like to invite each and every one of you who would like to make a comment. If it's a comment, a short comment, please. If it's a question, also a short question, to just come here, sit here, hold the microphone, and join the discussion. And then after the question was answered, you can just vacate the seat, and the next person can come. All right. Karibu Keti.
Asante sana. Catherine Nguyen, thank you. And Tom Lance and I teach at the Aga Khan University in Nairobi, the Graduate School of Media Communications, and was at Columbia for a long time, so I have some connections here. The narrative is not only how it's told, but the perception. And I was just looking at this map, and I'm wondering why the United States isn't in the center of it.
Yeah, well.
And when we're in China...
Who else is wondering about that?
Yeah, so we're in China, of course, the map is showing China in the center. Mm-hmm. So the narrative starts with the audience and the presentation of the audience. And the question I would like to ask you, Catherine, and Johan, about a bit about is, how is the new era of fake news and the faux framing affecting the narratives that are being created now? So fake news in Kenya is very big, of course, through China and around the world. So how is that affecting the frame that we see? And also then, the narrative that's perhaps a false narrative that's being created that to receptive, sometimes to very receptive audiences?
Okay, let me give you an example. Hey, this one I'm going to be killed for. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Jeffrey Gettleman is a very well-respected journalist.
In some places.
In some places, but
And
hey,
he was the correspondent for the New York Times.
yes, and he's reported quite a lot from East Africa. And there was a story he wrote about, he described very vividly how he saw bodies lining from the UN, whatever, in Juba, to talk about the Second War in SS. Oh, SS is South Sudan. Hey, I use acronyms. It makes life easier. Anyway, but I asked myself, if I was his editor, I would have wanted to see visuals. Man, you told me bodies were along. Nobody cares when you're talking about Africa. It doesn't seem as if the editors are awake when you're writing a story about Africa, so those kind of things are not picked up. Then the other thing is, yes, misinformation all over the place, but does it, if it is from Africa, do you really want to be as robust? Do you want to make sure that the facts that are being, if it's a fact, the information that is being shared is factual? It seems as if on that particular day we are just about to go for lunch, so it's not very robust. But on any other thing it is. And then the other thing is also, once something has been corrected, surely, just because it wasn't you who corrected it, it wasn't the NYT reporter who corrected it, or the WP reporter who asked for it to be changed, or the DW who broadcast it. Why is it that I point out that that is not true? It's not picked up. It has to come from another person like yourself. I ask myself, is there truth for me and is there truth for you? If it is going to rain like it rained this morning, it has rained, whether I said it or you said it. So when we do correct some of these misinfos, or this, we actually do correct some of these claims, the fact that it's coming from a small-time newspaper or from some quote-unquote unknown person doesn't wash. Oh, but you better tell the American ambassador to say it, then they will report it as truth. That's the only way. And that is what I find, I'm getting very, but it's because I get very angry when certain journalistic, we don't seem to want to apply them when you're reporting about the other.
Does that also apply, Ying, does that also apply to China? And does one develop some kind of defense mechanism?
Well, fake news is very different in China, in the sense that it's nothing new. The government has passed laws a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago, banning fake news. So, because journalism is a state-regulated industry, so there are penalties for manufacturing so-called fake news. Then, of course, then you have a problem, because then you need to allow room for honest mistakes, right? And you need to allow honest mistakes in order to have a conversation and to produce good journalism. So the regulation is has a restrictive effect on producing good journalism. And then I call fake news, we used to call it disinformation, propaganda, right? I think it's somehow the fake news the term becomes trendy. So for me, it's not new. And then, so in many Asian countries, you do have state-sponsored fake news. So those are the challenge for us.
So are you saying that, or would this imply that actually the Chinese audience, having been exposed to propaganda by the Communist Party since decades, has to readjust and to relearn to differentiate between fake news and a different narrative?
Well, I think people are smart in general. And I think for the longest time, they kind of understand what's fake and what's not fake
Yes.
in what they read in the state media. So it's almost part of the skill for survival to maintain your sanity and so that you can understand, figure out, reality. So it's very different.
It's, I think the fishbowl rules, I'm sorry, say just one question. Who else is there? You need to come in front for that, please. In between, while this gentleman is coming forward, I'm sometimes asking myself, is when it comes to the narrative, is the public sometimes far more open and far more without prejudice? And is the narrative more or stronger in the newsrooms than it is in public?
Okay, I think the concern about how the narrative goes would be more important to people because they are relating more. They're either going to suffer the consequences of. We can pontificate in the newsrooms, but I think the other thing is to be able to be in a position to show why it matters how people report about us or what the narrative is all about. So I think it concerns it concerns the people much more. And because we are supposed to be, quote unquote, the intermediaries.
Yes.
Or
The
intermediaries.
gatekeepers.
Yeah, we need to be able to nuance those conversations in a better way such that we can influence for good the stereotypes that exist. And that's why I'm very interested. And we're going to have a conversation with her again because I'm very interested. How do you, if you're not allowed to access all different kinds of sources of information, how then do you change, how do you get to me to be able to show me the other side, which is, or the full side of what Africa is? Because I'm thinking for Africa, the media the Chinese media in Africa is giving us only one side of our face, but we are leaving the rest of it. And that is now where there's this conflict. And it would be really, I'm just saying, it would be really interesting to figure out how the two regions, the media in the two regions can actually show all our faces such that the stereotypes are not dominant. And the only way that can happen is if we stop getting our news just from one side, we get from you and we get from the West. Because I know a lot more about China from Western media, and I can bet she knows a lot more about China from Western media. This, if you cut short, I'm not short-circuiting, but just kind of have a direct conversation.
Before we let the gentleman ask his question or make his statement, you wanted to briefly comment on this here?
I think just like Catherine and I, we need to have a discussion afterwards. We need to collaborate. Because
you had breakfast together this morning.
Already, but not enough.
Well, you're
because
on a good path.
You've been talking about state media, CGTN, that discriminates, that have stereotypes, right? And what I can share with you is the wonderful stories that just produced by individual Chinese about their living there in Africa and about how live in the real, authentic Africa. So even with the control by government, there are individuals who are producing good journalism. The monopoly of media is breaking down. The monopoly of institutional journalism is breaking down anyway. Everyone can be a writer, can be a producer. We still need gatekeepers, right? But the sources of information has become very diverse, and we live in exciting times. So my obsession then is promote these authentic grassroots voices.
Yeah.
And so we need to share more.
Excuse me that we kept you waiting for so long.
No worries, no worries. My name is Jamal. I'm an architect in Belgium, also a video blogger, as you can see. I come from the other side of this media. I don't belong to the majority of the people here who are media professionalists. I'm not. But I came from the side of when people are telling stories, and I tell stories about building. What brought me to this today, that we're going to build a boarding school in Cameroon this summer in August. And we have collected the money by our own, designed everything by our own, and we are going there and build it even with our hands and with the locals, with local material. And we have the same project as well in Tanzania in cooperation with Welle. It's a Polish organization building in a refugee camp in Tanzania for Burundis who got the nationality in Tanzania. However, when we write the script of the video blog about what we're going to do, there is a big question. Donors always like to see that their money have whipped tears and made everyone happy. Like whatever they paid. I mean, they paid a lot. Okay, I understand that. But they like to see this. However, from a professional, as an architect, I don't want to put my script like that way. You were speaking about this. How could you help us not to do this kind of charity video script? However, but we would like also people to get more involved, also donate again, because we still have a lot of projects and we would like to contribute more and more.
Thank you, Jamal. I think it's a very important question. You know, the narrative of NGOs, the narrative of charities describes a certain view on China, a certain view on Africa.
Well, that's the thing. I'm not putting you down, and I do appreciate whatever it is that you're doing, but my question I always ask myself, oh, they need schools. Maybe they don't actually. Maybe, did you ask? I mean, this whole thing, somebody has to come and save me from myself. Because poor me, I can't do anything for myself. That really bugs me, because seriously, I do believe the Burundians really need a place. They do. But oh God, I will go on for too long, but let me just get it to this point. This whole thing that we need help, and based on how you think we need that help, hey, I need your help, yes, but can at least have this conversation where I tell you what kind of help I need, and then you tell me. But don't wake up and tell me I'm going to build you a school. And please, I want Woye. Woye is in my place is all this very sad, like I saw the other day, MSF, or is it Plan International, this beautiful little kid with a tear. If she was golden-haired with blue eyes, it would have been a hit on the internet. It would have gone viral. But it was a Plan thing. Where Plan International, with only $3, this girl is going to have a life. Yeah, she's going to have a life based on what? How sustainable is that kind of intervention? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with helping. I'm only saying, can we have a conversation? I'm not a child. Let us talk about how you want to engage with me. We are equal. I might be poor, but man, hell, I know what I want. So why the hell is it that somebody will come and tell me, oh, you need a school because your children need to go to school? Yeah, maybe they do actually need to go to school, but you know, building a school means X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D. You can put it up, but it never gets used. It's happened so many times where Western governments have given us billions and billions of shillings because we need to reduce the numbers of maternal child health deaths, because they're really high. In my country, it's pretty bad. In Rwanda, it's better. But then the interventions, they think, oh, let's just build a hospital. Once you build a hospital, the women will come and you'll deliver babies, and there'll be a doctor there. Yeah. You made certain assumptions. These are pastoralists. They're moving up and down. Those interventions, building a hospital here, doesn't help, because this one next week, there'll be somewhere else. Why don't we talk about how we can help each other without necessarily prescribing from your own understanding or limited knowledge of what the circumstances are? So I do get, sorry, that is what I wanted to say.
So
Please
the acknowledgement of equality and of being on the same level would already be a big step forward.
Exactly.
In changing this narrative as we find it in media and politics, and apparently also in charity.
Oh yeah, in charity too.
Thanks a lot, Jamal. We have the next question and comment.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Claire Delabu Abdurazak. I'm from Nigeria. I work with the national TV station, so we're a public broadcaster. I'd just like to say that, indeed, the public broadcaster in Nigeria, in Africa, is doing quite a lot to undo the damage in terms of stereotyping and the type of information that we send out to other countries. But the gap is so wide that we cannot do it alone. My question is to Madam Catherine. The bulk of stereotyping that we get about Africa, unfortunately, is given by us journalists. We know that the other media may have their biases in terms of content, in terms of focus and audiences. So no matter what you do, the kind of information that you give out, they would always find a way of going behind the curtain, to dig out the tragedies and all the, negatives about Africa. But the bulk of what they report is given by us journalists. Because how would you, for instance, report a corrupt government? How would you report a tight government in Africa? How would you report embezzlement issues in Africa? Without sending, the wrong information across to the other world. You find other journalists from other countries, they hardly report negatives about their countries. Yes, so that's my concern.
So you're actually saying that without the help of African editors and journalists, the Chinese wouldn't find these paternalistic stories?
We give out the content.
Maybe, Catherine, a brief answer, and maybe Ying, who's also working a lot on Afro-China relations, can also comment on.
Okay, I just wanted to say one thing. It doesn't mean that that we African journalists are reporting negatively only about our own continent. I think we cannot hide the reality. We can try and nuance it. Okay? We cannot pretend that there is no corruption. There is. But
the Chinese don't report about the corruption anyway.
Yeah, well, the Chinese media may not report it because it's not constructive. The thing is to take it the next step. So what are we going to do about it? What institution? I think we cannot lie to ourselves. Bad things happen. And they do not only happen in Africa. They happen everywhere. It is how you manage that information. And managing that information means, as a journalist, I will say, hey, my sister, you're a thief. You have stolen. What have you stolen? What do we need to do about it? How can we as citizens make sure you don't steal again? You get my point? But we cannot pretend there is no theft. And it's not the only story. There are many other stories we are reporting. Unfortunately, I keep on saying this, it isn't sexy for me to come from America, Toronto, wherever, to come and just pick up this one story, unless it's the season, Africa season on some... You know what? But I'm just saying, we are not our own worst enemies. I think exposing corruption is part of our responsibility to build institutions within our own countries. So we cannot be taken, it cannot be then said, African media is exposing its soft underbelly. A guy, I have to tell it as it is, good or bad.
All right, Ying, a brief comment on that, because I'm sure you encounter this kind of debate all the time.
Well, I think in terms of so-called Western journalists working with African journalists, they also work with Chinese journalists. I don't have any problem with that. But there are issues. All right? I'm all for collaboration, but the issue would be the power inequality, which is the theme of this conference, which I like very much. There's a study on so-called fixers. That means you can have a perpetuate in Western correspondent, hire fixer, hire interpreter. They do the grunt work, right?
They make the arrangements for the interviews. They find the ways through borderlines.
They also do reporting, but they don't get the credit. And then they do not have the power to influence the dominant narrative. That is a problem, right? Now, how do we deal with that? Is back to we need to promote our own African Chinese, Asian journalists, we need to take agency to tell our stories, to expose the wrongs, and to tell the compelling human interest stories, and do it in a way and sell it in a way to the world that will attract attention. And I believe that if we really bring ourselves up, we can compete. Who says we cannot compete, right? So it's not so much us against the West. It's like working together seek a equal footing and tell the best story possible.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay.
I think we have to.
Okay.
Sorry, these are the rules. I've been told these are the rules. Normally I'm not such a strict character. We have the possibility of one more statement with your acceptance, because he raised his hand first. Please have a seat.
Hi, my name is Tomas. I've been working as a television journalist. And I've been thinking about the fact of that it might be important somehow to keep or to stick on the stereotypes sometimes, especially when you're like a TV journalist, for example. It's easier to tell the story. The story is also more easy understandable by the others. It's also easy to sell the story.
And your bosses like it as well.
Sorry?
And your bosses like it as well,
exactly.
because that's what they expect from you.
And at the same time, we have this challenge about to tell the whole story. So I would like to ask you both, how can we, as journalists, to deal with this idea of to simplify the story and at the same time to tell the whole story?
I don't think there's a magic bullet, but I think it's a challenge for us to get out of the comfort zone, to go against the grain, and talk to the unusual suspects, not going to the same sources all the time. For instance, I'm advocating we should have more women be the experts to be interviewed on shows. I don't know how you deal with your shows, but there's too many male experts on the shows, right? And it takes effort, it takes risk. I think it's possible, and it's risk worth taking.
Catherine?
Okay, I'll say this. Yeah, I know it's easy to do stereotypes. Man, it's so easy. You just, you can do. There's even a template, yeah? But I think there could be a template. But I know we are joking, but it's serious. But I think for me it would be like she says, look for the unusual. Don't go, if she's using Catherine as a fixer, please don't come to me again. Look for somebody else. Do your own homework. Get somebody. And please, opinions, the lived truths of Africans. If it's happening to me, please talk to me. I know where the shoe pinches. So look for those people who would tell the story from the human. Okay, look, anything that happens is about people, isn't it? That's our story, yeah? Whether it's policies happening to somebody, whether it is whatever it's happening to somebody. Think about it telling you to your grandmother. It's a story about another human being. Okay, maybe I look different from you, yeah, but it's a human being. If we start looking at stories from that perspective, it might be easier to stop doing the stereotypes. I stopped looking at women as anything other than she's just another human being. We had breakfast today, and I know what she likes. How many teaspoons? I didn't know that. Okay, she loves a sweet cup of coffee. So do I. I didn't know. But it's a human story. So all these things we're talking about, telling stories, it's about people. It's sitting down and telling your grandma, hey, did you know? And then she's like, what? Because it's a human being. All the rest of it is, I call it putting furniture in a house, which is about us. Okay,
Thank you.
So take it from that perspective. I think it will be easier.
The power of narratives, how to tell the whole story. I thank you very much, Catherine Guerrero and Ying Chan. And I think the question whether the whole story can be told is a discussion that we have to continue to discuss, because the question is, can the whole story be told, as we all have our own individual stories, and each whole story has a complete different narrative if you look at it from a different angle. I believe that countering narratives means most of all that one has to be open, that one has to be free of, or try to be free of stereotypes, although we carry around all our stereotypes with us, but maybe being aware of these stereotypes also when we work in the media is a very good step in the right direction. Personally, I feel that Africa is far more developed when it comes to openness, to talk about. I don't know whether you agree, but I think that China still has quite a way to go. And the discussion that Catherine described, for example, with the Chinese colleagues might underline this example. To conclude, I would say it's important, particularly so in the media and in politics, but of course also in society, to talk more with each other rather than talk about each other. Thank you very much. The media programs of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation are very happy that you came in such big numbers, and I think this is an ongoing discussion, and I wish you a good day. Thank you.
Show some good Chinese, eh?